Welcome to Pinnacle of Awesome, Buddhism Basics. I'm your host, Pema Shamsetso, and I'm here to help you understand the fundamentals of Buddhism. So, whether you're a new Buddhist, a longtime practitioner, or just someone interested in being happier, this podcast is for you. In these lessons, I'm going to be talking about one path to wisdom: learning, contemplation, and meditation. These aren't inherently Buddhist ideas, and as I go into the definitions of learning, contemplation, and meditation, you'll find that you do all of these all of the time, in some way, shape, or form. So in these courses, I'm going to tell you what it means to learn, contemplate, and meditate, as well as how to most effectively use these tools to increase your understanding, experience, and ultimately realization of Buddhism, the path of happiness. The essential quality of learning is, I got it. It's understanding. It's hard to interact with something that you don't understand. It's hard to make judgments on it. When I was in China, I had the bad habit of saying okay before I understood what had been asked. I had a professor ask me something in Chinese. Said, 往下山你要加班加吗? And I said, okay, 可以, no problem. And it wasn't until, I understood what she said after the fact. She asked if I wanted to be class president. I didn't want to be class president, but I did it anyway, because I agreed to it. But we can run into very similar problems when we try to interact with a misunderstanding. Because we are an academic society, we tend to take learning for granted and teachings for granted. So the first step in learning properly is really wanting teachings. Generating the desire for teachings will help your learning process. Part of the way it will help your learning process is it will focus you a little bit more. One of the many ways in which we see this in Buddhism is by offering. So if you attend a public teaching, you might see people going up and offering gifts to the teacher. This isn't a bribe or a payment or anything like that. What this is this is for the person who is about to learn, who is receiving teachings. If you think about the quality of wanting, and specifically how wanting affects when you acquire that, think about a time when you were really hungry. And then think about when you got that food. How much more aware you were of eating it. And now you probably ate it very quickly, but you really savored and really enjoyed those bites and the food. That desire is what creates that concentration. Offering is a way of prepping yourself for that. So imagine yourself hungry again. But you're holding this big pile of gems. These very beautiful, very precious gems. But you can't eat those gems. And someone comes and is offering you this plate of beautiful, delicious food. You want that food. You can't grab it. You can't get that food while you are holding this bag of gems. So you have to give up those bag of gems. You have to let go of them. Because you can't eat the food while you're holding on to these gems. That's what offering does, is it opens you up to receive something that you want and something that you need. The other way of generating this desire, especially in a situation like this where the teacher is not physically present, is that you can do what's called setting intention. Now, we do this in Buddhism all the time because it's the key to creating good karma. It's the key to setting ourselves up to continue thinking positively. Think about intention like creating a grocery list before you go to the grocery store. I'm sure some of you have been to the grocery store when you haven't made a list and you're really hungry. And you come out with a lot of snacks, maybe a couple frozen meals, and no plan. And you get home and you have some stuff that you need, but you also have a lot of stuff that you don't need. After you've satiated your hunger and you can think a little bit more about meal planning or what you need to spend your money on, it's a little disjointed. There are things that you have missed from the grocery store that you needed to pick up and you didn't pick up. There are things that you picked up and you don't need them, either because they're not helpful to you or because you already have 6 of them in your cupboard. If you make a list, when you go into the grocery store, you can look at that list and say, oh, well, I need tortillas and I need peanut butter, but I don't need rice. And you can go in, get what you need, and come out. And even though you might be really hungry, you can still say, oh, well, I have chips on here, so I can get some chips and I'll eat them, and then I won't be so hungry. And you come home and you've gotten everything that you need. That's what intention does for your thinking. When you set the intention, when you give yourself a proverbial grocery list of things you want to accomplish in the task that you're doing, it sets yourself up for ticking off those boxes and completing that list. It also makes whatever you're doing more efficient. Say, for example, I want to learn how to play guitar. So I'm going to go onto the internet and try to find a video teaching me how to play guitar. I'm sure many of you are aware of how easy it is to get distracted on the internet. If before I sit down at the computer, I say to myself, I am going to find a YouTube video and learn how to play guitar because I really want to learn how to play guitar. And I think about how much I want to play guitar, and I think, I really want to play guitar. And this is one step to achieving that goal. So when I go onto the internet, the first thing I look for is guitar videos. Instead of getting distracted by thinking, oh, maybe I'll check my email, because I have set that intention up beforehand, it leads me down that path. So when you are learning Dharma, you will hear in our lineage something like this: to liberate all beings from all suffering, and to establish all beings in true happiness, I will swiftly become Buddha in this very life. Therefore, I will joyfully listen to Dharma teachings. Or, therefore I will joyfully practice Dharma. Or, therefore I will joyfully teach Dharma. What this does is it focuses us and prepares us for the teaching that's about to happen. There are some mistakes that we make along the way while learning as well. In Buddhism, we call them the 3 defects of the vessel because they are best explained using the metaphor of pouring a precious substance into a cup, where the cup is the student and the precious substance is the Buddha's teachings. The first of these 3 is being like a vessel turned upside down. So if you don't actually listen to what is being taught, it will be like pouring this precious substance over a cup that is turned upside down. None of it will actually go in. If you don't physically listen, if you don't lend your ear to the person teaching, then you won't receive any teachings. This particular medium of podcasting, of audio casting, lends itself to the notion of multitasking, of listening to something while doing something else. Some common examples are listening to a podcast while commuting to work or while cleaning the house or something like that. That's okay. Just be aware that the potential for distraction is fairly high, and there's a possibility that you might not actually hear the words that I'm speaking. Thankfully, these audiocasts are relatively short, so you can listen to them multiple times and really make sure that you actually heard everything that I'm saying. I would also caution you against listening to this while doing mentally engaging activities like writing or coding or reading. The second defect of the vessel is like a vessel with a hole in it. This specifically relates to memory. If you don't remember the teachings, it will be like pouring this medicinal substance in a cup that has a hole in it. The nectar will go into the vessel, but it won't stay there. It will just leak out the bottom and be gone. You can't put into practice something that you don't remember. Part of our habit of learning in this society is very much learning with a timestamp. So a lot of our secondary school education is learning things in order to pass the test. And then once you pass the test, That's it. You don't have to remember it anymore. Be very careful of falling into that habit. I have learned a lot of things in my life, and I have forgotten most of them. When I came out of high school, I was incredibly knowledgeable. If you ask any high school, if you ask any secondary school student, they can probably tell you more about maths or geography than you probably know now. Because we have a habit of time stamping our learning, we retain it for a small period and then forget it. Try not to do it with Dharma teachings. If you need to, listen to this audio cast again, look at your notes, do a little bit of repetition in order to retain it. And that way, you will be able to really look at it and move on to the next step of contemplation. The third defect is like being a vessel contaminated with poison. This relates specifically to negative intention. For example, let's say you think to yourself, people really like Buddhists, so I'm going to listen to Pinnacle of Awesome, Buddhism Basics, and get enough of an understanding so that I can sound Buddhist, and then I will talk about Buddhism Basics, and people will think that I'm Buddhist, and then they'll like me. That would be taking the teachings of Buddhism and contaminating them with your own desire and greed for praise and to be liked. And that is poisonous. When we talked about intention earlier, we talked about that grocery list. If your grocery list for coming into teachings includes negative thinking, then you are going to get out the result of that. And it won't be Buddha's teachings that you're learning. It will be something else. If I pour water into a cup that is lined with acid, when I give that to someone or when I drink that, it's not going to be water. It's going to be acid water, and it's going to hurt when I drink it. In the same way, it's very important to make sure that you have the correct intention. I'm not expecting you to have pure bodhicitta intention right now. I'm not expecting you to come into this with completely selfless intentions. Recognizing that you are suffering and you don't understand the causes of suffering, and you want to increase your understanding of why you and others suffer. Recognizing that you don't necessarily know what the causes of happiness is, and wanting to increase your understanding of happiness and the causes of happiness so that you can increase those causes of happiness and decrease those causes of suffering. The desire to learn and to understand is good enough. Even better is if you do it not only because it will benefit yourself, but also because it will benefit other people, the people around you, the people who love you, even the people who don't really know you. If you're looking for a good starting intention, something that you know is good, that doesn't necessarily contain language that you're not comfortable with, think like this. I recognize that my negative thinking, my anger, my jealousy, my greed, my pride, and my ignorance are detrimental to me and to the people around me. Therefore, I will actively search out methods to decrease my negative thinking. That intention is enough to make sure that you don't poison these teachings in such a way that will be detrimental to you. For those of you who already have some level of understanding and faith, you can use this intention. And I encourage you to use this before you do any activity, as it will help turn every activity you do into practice. It goes like this: to liberate all beings from all suffering, and to establish all beings in true happiness, I will swiftly become Buddha in this very life. Therefore, I will joyfully practice the Buddha path. So whichever intention is more comfortable for you, I really encourage you to practice reciting that. Practice saying it out loud. I encourage you to set your intention at the very least every morning when you wake up. It's not a very detailed grocery list when you don't do it often, but it's enough that it will help. Learning Dharma leads to understanding Dharma. Learning Buddhism leads to understanding Buddhism. This is a really key point. The result of learning is understanding. Understanding doesn't necessarily mean agreeing with. It's very important to understand things before you make judgments. By understanding, we can really investigate something. We can look for truth in things that we understand. Understanding doesn't necessarily mean logically correct. For example, I can understand racism. I can understand the ways in which it manifests, the ways in which it is institutionalized, the ways in which it is perpetuated. Understanding does not mean that I condone it. Understanding also does not mean that it has any sturdy logical basis. It turns out all negative thinking has very rickety logical basis. I'm not sure if any of you have had real contact with children, but let me tell you, the logic of children is wild. I heard this story of a teacher who was talking to their students about what they would do if a fire broke out. And this one kid says, I'd find some milk and I'd pour a bunch of milk on it, which baffled the teacher. So the teacher asks this kid, why would you pour milk on a fire? And the kid responds, well, when you eat something spicy, it's really hot. And so you drink milk so it's not so hot. And fires are hot, so they're spicy, which means that you should pour milk on it so that it's not so spicy. That's why it's very important to understand things so that you can test them and determine whether or not the logic is sound, whether or not it is applicable in your daily life, and whether or not it is correct. In order to appropriately test Buddhism, it's important to make sure that you have the words and the meaning according to Buddhism. I ran into a lecturer who has a PhD in Buddhism and was teaching from the assumption that karma is created based on your actions, which is not what the Buddha taught. That is incorrect meaning to the word karma. And so all of his teachings were based on this incorrect meaning. If you don't get the right meaning, then when you go to the next phase of contemplation, you won't be contemplating on Buddha's teachings, you'll be contemplating on something else. Luckily, this is in an audio format, so you can re-listen to these teachings multiple times to make sure that you really got it. The other thing you can do is ask other people who were at the teachings. So if you are listening to this with someone else, you can ask them, this is what I understood when she said learning. Is that what you understood as well? The other thing you can do is send me an email at pinnacleofawesome@gmail.com. All one word. And while I cannot guarantee that I will send you a response email, I will do my best. Every couple of courses, I will have a question and answer session. So I'll go through the emails that I have received and pick out some very common ones, or maybe some very deep ones, and answer them in a format that you can re-listen to. This gives me an opportunity to make sure that I have transmitted these things correctly, and especially because in this format, I am not there to see whether or not this has landed correctly. This method of asking me questions to make sure that you got it will be really helpful. Some questions I will be able to answer very quickly. I might send you an email with a quick clarification. I might also send you an email saying, this is a really good question. I'm going to save it for question and answer session. Or, this is a really good question. I'm going to save this for a different teaching. Some of you might ask questions that I am not qualified to teach. In those cases, I can either direct you to a public teaching happening in your area or to a live teaching that is happening on a different medium. Many of the lamas in my lineage use Facebook Live as a teaching method. Because it has that live aspect, you can send questions in, and at the end of their sessions, they answer those questions. Those mediums are also very good, and I will direct you to those in those emails. You can also send me an email just asking for those resources, even if you don't have a question, and I can send you in the right direction. I'm going to give you some homework. Because these teachings are related to ourselves, it's very important to determine whether or not they actually apply to ourselves. And I'll be giving you some tips on how to take these teachings and contemplate them and chew on them for a little bit. So your homework for this session is to see how long it takes you before you forget the 3 defects of the vessel. Specifically, both the words, the order, and the meaning of them. So don't re-listen to this, give it a couple of days, and see if you remember the order, the words, and the meaning. The other thing I want you to do is get a small journal, some sort of pocketbook, and start to carry it with you. Something that you can fit into your pocket or your purse, and a pen or pencil to go along with it. This will be really good for taking these teachings and continuing on with them in your daily life, instead of doing it only when you are listening to these courses. I want you to start observing your thinking and when you are learning. For example, if you are at work and someone is telling you how to use something, or if you are watching a YouTube video on how to do something. Check how often you start thinking about something else during these instances. Use your little book and just tally it. So if you are at some sort of orientation, we'll say, take your book, keep it out, and tally every time you notice your thinking drift. After you do this for a little bit, I want you to try generating a desire for teachings. So before you receive any teachings, before you read a book, or before you listen to these teachings again, or before you watch any sort of YouTube, try really generating the desire for these teachings. Just spend 3 to 5 minutes thinking about how much you want the teaching, what you plan to do with the knowledge, why you want it, things like that. Tally when your mind wanders in the teachings you're receiving after you've generated that want. Compare and contrast. Do this experiment a couple of times. Really look at how you learn and recognize all of the ways in which you learn in your daily life. Thank you for listening to Pinnacle of Awesome, Buddhism Basics. This concludes the first teaching in this course on learning, contemplation, and meditation. I hope by giving you a definition of learning, some examples of ways in which you learn all the time, and things to avoid while learning, that you take these and apply them both to this course and also to other things that you do. The next course is going to be on contemplation, which is the next part of this learning, contemplation, and meditation trio. I look forward to receiving your questions and helping you along the path to Buddha. May these teachings benefit you as much as they have benefited me. May we take these teachings and use them to reduce our anger, jealousy, greed, pride, and ignorance. May we use these teachings to increase our renunciation, compassion, faith, love, and wisdom. May we be better humans tomorrow than we were today.